Hey everybody, how's it going? Stoud Man coming back at you again today, and I'm going to be talking to you about some Arrow Blu-rays that I own that I decided to watch for Halloween. I've got a few horror movies, or horror comedy movies, I guess I would say, that I own from Arrow Video. One of them is a Region A release, but the other are Region B releases, the other two. So I figured since I have my region free player, I might as well watch all three of them and do a little review of all these Arrow releases because they're pretty damn cool releases. So first off, I watched The Stuff. This is my Region A release, but you can also get this exact same release, I think, in Region B. And I think it'll probably be cheaper that way, so if you have a region free player, then I highly recommend doing that. But yeah, this is a great, cheesy, funny little horror movie that honestly, in a lot of ways, it is an intentional horror comedy, but in a lot of other ways, it is also a serious look at and a serious criticism of consumerism in the 80's culture. And I really love it for that because there is a level of truth to that in this movie. And I also love that the prototype that they use for the plot in this movie is straight out of the sci-fi B movie. It's straight out of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of movie, in fact. It's essentially the plot of every anti-communism sci-fi B movie that you saw in the 50s, right? In the 50s and 60s. But they took it and turned it into an anti-consumerism story, which is like the complete opposite of what it originally was, and they put it in this movie to make a completely different statement with a completely different and hilarious kind of horror movie here, which I thought worked really freaking well, was hilarious. I had not actually seen this until a few years ago, and when I did, I was really shocked to discover that it was quite fucking good. I mean, a lot of people said, "Oh, you gotta see this movie. This is an absolute must see." And I was like, "Okay, sure, whatever." So, of course, when I actually sat down and watched it with them, I was just blown away by how fucking good this movie is, by how amazing it is. And yes, it's cheesy in a lot of ways, and a lot of the acting is freaking horrible, but a lot of it is also a bunch of hammy actors eating up the scenery at every possible chance, and it's just so much fun. It's so much fun. And this particular release has a new 52-minute documentary featuring Larry Cohen, producer Paul Kurta, actress Andrea Marcovici, and mechanical makeup effects creator Steve Neal, and critic Kim Newman. I watched that documentary. I watched all 52 minutes of it. I normally, for a review, if I'm going to watch the special features, I might even, if it's something that long, I might even just watch like half of it. And at the time, I was considering only watching half of it, but the documentary was good enough that I had to watch through the whole thing. It was informative. It was fun. It was just a really good watch. I won't say it's the best documentary I've ever seen, but for a documentary about the stuff, it was pretty enlightening, pretty informative, pretty cool. Because for movies like these, which resemble the sci-fi B movies, you're probably thinking of somebody like Ed Wood. You're thinking of somebody like Roger Corman. You're thinking of directors who maybe don't have a high IQ, and they're just making movies that they want to make for fun, kind of thing. Not having a message in mind, not really being intelligent in the way that they make the film, but just making a fun little thing because they want to, because they like making movies kind of director. That's the kind of director you imagine when you think of a movie like this. But Larry Cohen is actually a very smart guy. If you listen to him in the documentary there, you will just immediately become struck by the kind of director he actually is. That he actually did have a message for this that he intended, and that it was a pretty powerful message, and that the way he shoots movies, he is a tenacious filmmaker. Even according to the people he worked with, he did a lot of crazy things that most directors would not do. In particular, there was one story about how in the opening scene of the film, for the opening scene, you see these guys who are, I guess they're drilling down into the earth, right? That's their job. They're drilling, I guess, maybe for oil or something. It's snowing outside, and this guy sees a bunch of white stuff and just, no reason, just puts it in his mouth immediately. One of those really weird, stupid, crazy, what the fuck things from the movie. But the story behind that scene is that it was not intended to be shot in the snow. The snow that you see in that scene is real. It's real snow. It's taking place outside. They're shooting it outside, and they were not intending for that scene to have any snow in it. But the second it started snowing, one of the people who was behind all the electrical equipment and all the cameras and all that stuff and the lighting said, well, we got to pack things up. We're going to have to shoot this another time. And Larry Cohen, being the visionary filmmaker that he is, says, no, we're not packing up. We're shooting this right now. I want this shot. He wanted the shot with the snow because he's the kind of director who sees something and he's like, that's going to pop. That's going to look fucking great on film. I need to catch that. That needs to be in this scene. I have to get this. He's the kind of guy who, he literally risked all of the equipment. He risked all of the freaking expensive electronic equipment that he had on set at the time in order to get that shot. And sure enough, people told him things were going to start exploding. Things started exploding. They lost a lot of fucking electrical equipment on that set, for that particular scene. He no doubt wasted a lot of the studio's money making this movie just to get that one shot. That's the same kind of tenacity that I think of when I think of somebody like Orson Welles, who is noted for like digging up a set in order to get a low enough angle shot for Citizen Kane, for the shot that he wanted in that movie. So, it's the same kind of tenacity, just fucking destroying a set, destroying equipment in order to get the shot that you want. So I thought that was a really cool thing that you find out about Larry Cohen in that documentary for the stuff. Great movie, great little horror comedy to watch for Halloween. So then after that, I decided to watch Killer Klowns from Outer Space. This is the Region B release from Arrow Video, and it does have a reversible cover. The reversible cover has the original artwork. I'll show you there. I'm actually thinking of changing it back to the original artwork now. This is Killer Klowns from Outer Space from the Kyoto Brothers, and it has a bunch of cool special features in here, on here I should say, including the audio commentary with the Kyoto Brothers themselves, which I listened to while watching this movie for probably the third or fourth time. Again, this is one of those movies I hadn't seen until recently, and ever since I did see it recently, like in the past few years, I've been watching it every year for Halloween, or every year at some point, because it's just one of those movies that's a bunch of fun to watch. And it's one of those movies where the makeup and the set design and all that good stuff and the practical effects are so fucking good. Sometimes it's cheesy, but it's also good and a lot of fun. And yeah, I love it. This is just one of those horror movies that does not take itself too seriously, obviously. Yes, there are some horrifying moments in the film. As a matter of fact, the body count in this film is pretty fucking high when you actually stop to think about it. It's not as gory as some other movies, but the body count itself actually is pretty freaking high. If you think about all the people who were cocooned in this movie, that's all I'm going to say for those who haven't seen it. I don't want to spoil it. But sure enough, the commentary on this is really enlightening. It's really cool. The movie is tons of fun. I love Royal Dano's role in this particular movie because it's exactly like his role in Space Invaders, and that's another movie I like to watch during Halloween time, around this time of year. And sure enough, I'm probably going to be watching that at some point next week. But it was nice to be able to revisit Killer Klowns beforehand, because gotta love that old farmer role, and just gotta love the Killer Klowns movie itself. For those who haven't seen it, you got to. It's just a hilariously fun movie, and it's just a bunch of guys going out making a movie with their friends. Like most of the actors in this movie were just, the friends of the Kyoto brothers, and they all got together and made a movie. And this is kind of what happens. So this is really cool. And if you don't know who the Kyoto brothers are, I highly recommend that you go online right now and look up all the stuff that they've done in the makeup and special effects department, because holy crap, they are gods when it comes to that stuff. They are some of the best in the business. And I actually went through and watched one of the documentary featurettes on here as well, where the Kyoto brothers are talking about making the creatures that they do, not only in Killer Klowns, but in a lot of other movies. And one of the Kyoto brothers said something very poignant, very true, that is a quote that I think I'll be using for a long time from now on, that I think a lot of you will appreciate too. He said, every time you see CGI, no matter how good CGI looks, it's always fake, and no matter how bad practical effects look, it's always real. That quote is so fucking good. It's so true. Think about it. Every time you see good CGI, it always in some way looks fake or off-putting. Every time you see bad special effects, bad practical effects like you would see in here, it always looks real. It always looks like something you'd believe could happen almost, I don't know why, but it feels more real, doesn't it? It just feels more real than CGI in a lot of ways. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people would agree with that. Because I know there are a lot of horror fans out there who prefer practical effects to CGI. So, yeah. If you're like that, I think you will like this movie, and I think you'll agree with the Kyoto brothers on their stance on that particular subject. So, yeah. This is a really cool release. Bunch of special features. Just look at that. Look at that block of text. That's all special features, baby. Oh, yeah. And then, last but not least, I decided to finally pop in my copy of The Burbs here. This is the steelbook of The Burbs, which was actually, I think, the first Region B release I ever got. And sure enough, I didn't get a chance to watch it until now. I decided, since I had my Region Free player, now I could. I'm going to watch The Burbs. It's never a bad time to watch The Burbs. It's one of the best movies ever. You got Joe Dante in this movie at his best, directing the film and doing some amazing work. He loves horror movies, so he's going to be able to make a great horror comedy that references a bunch of other horror movies. And the commentary on this particular release is from the writer, I believe, the writer of the film. And the commentary was absolutely enlightening. Very interesting commentary here, because he ends up talking about the influences that he had while writing the film. He was highly influenced by, apparently, Rear Window. In fact, the original idea for this film was a TV pilot that he had come up with that he wanted to call Bay Window, as a reference to Rear Window. And if you think about the story of the plot, a bunch of people in the suburbs just kind of watching people out the window and peeking and snooping on people and all that stuff, it really does have some ties, if you think about it, to Rear Window. So I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah, this, according to the writer himself, it was intended to be like a reference to Rear Window in a lot of ways. A different 80s version of Rear Window, but this time taking place in the suburbs, because nothing that terrible actually happens in the city. It always happens in the burbs. And that's the whole kind of concept behind the story. And apparently originally the way it was supposed to end also was with the main character, played by Tom Hanks, being driven away in the ambulance by the villains. I don't want to give too much away if you haven't seen it yet. But yes, being driven away by the villains, and you're not supposed to know whether or not they killed him or whether or not they got away or what. But they changed that at the last second. The studios interfered because they didn't want it to be open-ended in that way. They didn't want anybody to think that Tom Hanks was being killed, essentially. So because it was open-ended and you didn't know what was actually happening there, and there was a possibility that Tom Hanks's character could have died, and at the time Tom Hanks was huge because Big had just come out. The studios didn't want to have one of Tom Hanks' characters dying in the movie because of that, because he was so big at the time. So Tom Hanks, the brilliant comedic actor that he was at the time, the brilliant actor that he is in general, he brought something to the role that would not have been possible without him. I absolutely love him, but at the same time, you have to admit he did actually also kind of interfere with the original concept behind the plot of the film. But I think it actually works better in a lot of ways the way that they did it. It almost feels more cohesive the way that it actually ended up. So I'm not too upset about that. I'm not beat up over it. I think it worked really well the way it did. And I recall the first time I watched this was on a 13-inch tube TV that was black and white. And it really feels proper to watch this movie in black and white. I wish they would do that. I wish they would do a release where they had a black and white version of the film that you could watch. Because in a lot of ways it's referencing a lot of those early Universal horror movies. It's done on the Universal backlot. I mean, the first house that they originally intended to use for this, for the Klopex house, the horror house, as it were, in this movie, the first house they intended to use was the Munsters house. So, I mean, what more do you need to know? I mean, this movie references so many of those classic horror movies in a lot of great ways, and I remember seeing it originally for the first time in black and white, and I think it honestly is better in black and white in a lot of ways. It's a very colorful movie, and I don't have a problem with that color. I like the color, but I think it can also be a lot of fun to watch it in black and white. So if I had any recommendation for anybody who considering a studio release of this at some point in the near future, maybe a deluxe release like this one, my advice would be to consider that. Consider doing a black and white version, kind of the way that there was a black and white version for Mad Max, you know what I mean? So, yeah. Interesting thought, at least. I love The Burbs. Absolutely hilarious. Great fucking story. Great movie. And interesting commentary. The writer here, he went on to do some kind of interesting stuff. He also, if I remember correctly, did Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which I talked about previously, earlier, a couple of weeks ago, during one of my other videos. So, for Halloween. So, yeah, I mean, that was pretty cool to discover that he was actually the writer for that movie as well. And the commentary was interesting in that he was basically being asked a lot of questions. It was basically more of an interview that was taking place while they were watching the movie. So he was being asked a lot of questions by a moderator and answering those questions and talking about his experiences on the set and with the film and all that. And it was just very informative and enlightening and a weird kind of way to do a commentary for a movie, but it worked. You know, it worked. And it was interesting to hear that. You kept your interest throughout. There are some commentaries where they don't have a moderator, they don't do it that way, and it doesn't work, and you're not interested, and you turn it off almost immediately. But this commentary, they kept it interesting throughout. It's an interesting listen while you're watching the movie, especially if you've seen it so many times, such as I have, the same way that I have. So, yeah, highly recommend this particular set if you can get it. It comes both in this beautiful steelbook and in another release with an awesome piece of artwork on the front. A release like this one, so it's not a steelbook, but it's like this. The steelbook costs a little bit more. The version that's in one of these cases is a little bit less, so if you don't want the steelbook, go for the other one. It's just as good, has the same content, you get the same commentary, really cool stuff, Love this movie. You gotta love The Burbs. It's one of the greats. So yeah, I had a lot of fun going back and watching all of these horror comedies. And yeah, if you really think about it, they all are horror comedies. I didn't even stop to think about that when I looked on my shelf and saw all the horror movies that I have from Arrow. Unintentionally, the only horror movies I picked up from Arrow were all horror comedies. So, yeah. And they were all from the 80s, too. How about that? I mean, all 80s horror comedies. Can't go wrong. Anyways, that'll do it for me today. Thanks for watching, you guys. Catch you later. Peace.